The morning sun filtered through the windows of the Grand Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, casting a golden glow across the massive ballroom. Everything looked perfect. White orchids lined every table, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Cherry blossom branches, carefully arranged by the hotel's best decorators, created an elegant canopy above the ceremony space. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting light across 200 empty chairs that would soon hold family and friends. Yuki stood in the bridal suite on the 5th floor, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. At 28 years old, she had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of silk and lace, custom-made by a designer in Kyoto. It had taken 6 months to create and cost more than her car. The dress hugged her figure perfectly before flowing into a long train that seemed to float behind her like a cloud. Her mother fussed with the veil, adjusting it for the 10th time. "You look like a princess," she whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. Yuki's 3 bridesmaids stood nearby, dressed in soft pink gowns, their faces glowing with excitement. They had been her closest friends since university, and seeing them here made everything feel real. "I can't believe this is actually happening," Yuki said softly, touching the delicate pearl necklace her grandmother had given her that morning. It was the same necklace her grandmother had worn at her own wedding 60 years ago. Her best friend Keiko squeezed her hand. "You and Hiroshi are going to be so happy together. He's lucky to have you." Yuki smiled, though somewhere deep in her chest she felt a tiny flutter of nervousness. She had been with Hiroshi for 4 years. They had met at a business conference where she worked as a translator. He was ambitious, successful, and charming. Her parents approved of him. His family welcomed her warmly. Everything made sense on paper. They had spent 2 years planning this wedding. Every detail had been chosen with care. The flowers, the music, the menu for the reception. Yuki had personally written the invitations in careful calligraphy. She had tasted 17 different cake flavors before choosing the perfect one. This wasn't just a wedding. It was supposed to be the beginning of her forever. Downstairs in the ballroom, guests began arriving. Elderly aunts and uncles, cousins she hadn't seen in years, colleagues from her job, Hiroshi's business associates in expensive suits. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, smiling and chatting as they found their seats. The photographers moved around the room, capturing every moment. A string quartet played soft classical music in the corner. Yuki's father came to the bridal suite at exactly 2 o'clock. He looked distinguished in his formal black suit, though his eyes were slightly red. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked gently. She nodded, taking his arm. Her heart pounded as they walked down the hallway toward the grand staircase. This was it. In a few minutes, she would walk down that aisle and become someone's wife. Mrs. Yamada. A new chapter, a new life. The music changed as they reached the top of the staircase. Through the open doors, she could see the aisle stretched out before her, covered in white rose petals. Every head turned to look at her. She saw her mother crying in the front row. She saw Hiroshi's parents standing proudly. The officiant stood at the altar, his robes immaculate, his expression warm and welcoming. But where was Hiroshi? The spot where the groom should be standing was empty. Yuki felt her father's arm tense slightly under hers. They paused at the entrance. Maybe Hiroshi was running late. Maybe he was in the restroom. Maybe there was some last-minute detail he needed to handle. She waited, her smile feeling frozen on her face. 5 minutes passed. The music continued playing, but the mood in the room shifted. Guests began whispering to each other, looking around. Some pulled out their phones, checking messages. Yuki's mother stood up, concern written across her face. 10 minutes, 15. The photographers lowered their cameras, unsure what to capture. The string quartet kept playing the same song over and over, not knowing what else to do. Yuki's hands trembled. Her bouquet shook slightly, the white roses and baby's breath suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Her father leaned close and whispered, "Do you want to sit down? Take a moment?" She shook her head. She couldn't move. If she moved, if she acknowledged what might be happening, it would become real. 20 minutes late. Hiroshi's best man, a tall businessman named Takeshi, suddenly stood up from his seat. His phone was pressed to his ear and his face had gone completely pale. He listened for a moment, said something sharp in response, then ended the call. The entire room watched as he walked toward the altar, his steps heavy. He spoke quietly to the officiant, who closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then Takeshi turned to face the crowd. The room went silent. Even the quartet stopped playing. "I'm sorry," Takeshi said, his voice barely above a whisper, but in the silent room, everyone heard every word. "Hiroshi, he's not coming. He asked me to tell you. He can't go through with it." The words hit Yuki like a physical blow. She felt her knees weaken. Her father caught her, holding her steady. Around the room, gasps erupted. Someone's grandmother cried out in shock. Yuki's mother covered her mouth with both hands. "Can't go through with it." The words didn't make sense. They had picked out their apartment together. They had chosen names for their future children. They had planned a honeymoon to Italy. How could he not go through with it? "He sent a message," Takeshi continued, looking miserable. "He said he's sorry, but he realized he's not ready for marriage. He left this morning, while Yuki was having her hair styled, while she was putting on this expensive dress, while she was nervously excited about their future together. Hiroshi had been planning his escape." The room erupted into chaos. Guests jumped to their feet. Some rushed toward Yuki. Others grabbed their phones, already sharing the news. Hiroshi's mother began crying loudly, apologizing to everyone around her. His father looked stunned, frozen in his seat. Yuki's mother ran up the aisle and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Oh, sweetheart. Oh, my baby." But Yuki couldn't cry. She couldn't speak. She just stood there in her perfect dress, holding her perfect bouquet in her perfect venue, with 200 people staring at her with pity in their eyes. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it was becoming the most humiliating moment she could imagine. Her bridesmaids surrounded her, forming a protective circle. "Let's go back upstairs," Keiko urged. "Come on, you don't need to stand here." But just as they began to guide her away from the crowd, someone near the window gasped loudly. "What is that?" Through the tall windows overlooking the street, several guests noticed something unusual. Cars, lots of them. Big black vehicles pulling up to the hotel entrance one after another. The rumble of engines grew louder, impossible to ignore even inside the thick walls of the grand ballroom. "Is that the police?" someone asked. "Maybe hotel security?" Yuki barely registered any of it. What did it matter? Her wedding was over before it had even begun. Her future husband had abandoned her in front of everyone she knew. Nothing else could possibly matter now, but she was wrong. What was about to happen next would change everything. The sound of engines grew louder, impossible to ignore. More guests rushed to the windows, pressing against the glass to see what was happening outside. The ballroom filled with confused murmurs and excited whispers. "There must be at least 50 cars out there," someone said, voice filled with wonder. 70, I counted 70, another guest corrected. Yuki stood frozen at the altar, still processing the fact that her groom had abandoned her. Her mind felt foggy, like she was watching everything happen to someone else. Her mother held her hand tightly, and her father stood protectively beside her, his jaw clenched in anger at what Hiroshi had done. Through the window, the scene outside looked like something from a movie. Sleek black SUVs lined up along the street in perfect formation, blocking traffic. Each vehicle looked identical, with tinted windows so dark you couldn't see inside. They weren't ordinary cars. They were the kind of vehicles you'd see in a presidential motorcade or a high-security convoy. Hotel security guards rushed around outside, talking frantically into their radios. They looked completely overwhelmed, unsure how to handle whatever was happening. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "Maybe it's someone important," one of Yuki's aunts suggested. "A politician or a celebrity?" "Why would they come here now?" another guest asked. Inside the ballroom, the initial shock of the abandoned wedding began mixing with curiosity about this strange interruption. Some guests started recording on their phones. Others called family members to tell them something bizarre was happening. Then the doors of the SUVs began opening. Men stepped out, one after another. They wore formal military uniforms, crisp and perfectly pressed. Navy blue jackets with rows of medals and ribbons, white caps, polished black shoes that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. They moved with precision, standing at attention beside their vehicles. "Those are American military uniform," said one of Hiroshi's colleagues who had studied abroad in the United States. "But why are they here?" More vehicles arrived. The count went past 70, past 75. Each one disgorged more uniformed men. They weren't rushing or causing chaos. Instead, they assembled with military discipline, forming neat rows, standing perfectly still. The hotel manager burst into the ballroom looking panicked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Excuse me, he called out, trying to get everyone's attention. We're not sure what's happening, but we ask that everyone remain calm. The authorities are on their way. Remain calm? How could anyone remain calm? This was already the strangest day of Yuki's life, and it was getting stranger by the minute. Then the most shocking thing happened. The uniformed men began filing into the hotel, not aggressively or threateningly. They walked calmly, respectfully, but with clear purpose. Hotel staff tried to stop them, but there were too many. Dozens became hundreds. The doors to the ballroom opened wide, and they entered. Row after row of American military servicemen walked in, filling the back of the room. They stood at attention, hands at their sides, faces serious but not hostile. The guests parted like water, creating space, too stunned to do anything but stare. Yuki's heart pounded. This couldn't be happening. First her wedding was destroyed, and now what? Was this some kind of security threat? Had something terrible happened? Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. "Dad, what's going on?" she whispered, gripping his arm. "I don't know, sweetheart. But stay close to me." More and more uniformed men entered, 50, 100, 200. The ballroom was massive, but it was becoming crowded. They positioned themselves along the walls, in the aisles, wherever there was space. Yuki did a quick mental count and felt dizzy. There had to be at least 800 of them. 800 American military servicemen at her failed wedding. This had to be a nightmare. She would wake up any second, and none of this would be real. Not Hiroshi's abandonment. Not this bizarre invasion of soldiers. The wedding guests huddled together, some frightened, some fascinated. Yuki's grandmother clutched her prayer beads, muttering under her breath. Children hid behind their parents. Even Hiroshi's father, usually so confident and commanding, looked completely lost. Then an officer stepped forward from the group. He was older than the others, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and a chest full of medals. His presence commanded attention. The room fell silent as he walked toward the front, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He stopped a respectful distance from Yuki and her family. Then, to everyone's surprise, he bowed, a deep, formal Japanese bow that showed genuine respect. "Mr. Tanaka," he said in clear English, his voice strong but gentle. "My name is Captain James Morrison, United States Navy. I apologize for this intrusion, especially at such a difficult time." A translator stepped forward, a young Japanese woman in uniform, and repeated his words in Japanese for those who needed it. Yuki's father straightened his shoulders, still protective of his daughter. "What is this about? Why are you here?" Captain Morrison's eyes shifted to Yuki. There was something in his expression, something that looked like gratitude mixed with determination. "Sir, we're here for your daughter. We mean no harm or disruption. We're here to honor her." The translator repeated this, and confused whispers rippled through the crowd. Honor her? What did that mean? Yuki felt her legs trembling. She still wore her wedding dress, still held her bouquet, though several roses had fallen to the floor during all the chaos. Her carefully done makeup was smudged from crying. She must look like a mess. And now hundreds of American soldiers were saying they came for her. "I don't understand," Yuki's mother said, stepping forward. "My daughter has never even been to America. There must be some mistake." Captain Morrison shook his head slowly. "There's no mistake, ma'am. May I speak with your daughter directly?" Yuki's father looked at her, a question in his eyes. She nodded weakly. What else could she do? This day had already destroyed every expectation she'd had. She might as well hear what this stranger had to say. The captain approached her carefully, as if she were something fragile that might break. Behind him, all 800 servicemen stood perfectly still, watching. The weight of their attention felt overwhelming. "Miss Tanaka," he began, his voice softening. "You probably don't remember me. 4 years ago, on a rainy night in Okinawa, there was an accident. A military transport bus carrying 47 of my men crashed off a coastal road during a typhoon." Yuki's breath caught in her throat. Okinawa. 4 years ago. The memory hit her like a wave. She had been working late that night, translating documents at the American military base. The typhoon had been terrible, with rain so heavy you could barely see through it. She was driving home when she saw the bus swerve off the road and plunge into the water below. The bus went into the ocean, Captain Morrison continued, watching her face carefully. It was sinking fast. Emergency services were 20 minutes away because of the storm. Those men were trapped, injured, drowning, Yuki remembered. She remembered pulling over, calling for help, then running down the embankment. The water had been freezing and violent, waves crashing over her head. But she had seen men inside that bus, their faces pressed against windows, terror in their eyes. "You dove in," the captain said, his voice thick with emotion now. "Without hesitation, without thinking about your own safety. You pulled men out of that bus. You kept them calm while we waited for rescue. You coordinated between Japanese emergency responders and our military personnel, because you spoke both languages fluently. You saved lives that night, Miss Tanaka." The ballroom was completely silent now. Every guest listened, captivated. 47 men survived that accident, Captain Morrison continued. And they survived because of you. You refused medals. You refused recognition. You told the base commander you were just doing what anyone would do, and then you disappeared back into your life. Tears streamed down Yuki's face. She had never told anyone about that night. Not her parents. Not her friends. Not even Hiroshi. It had seemed too personal, too frightening to relive by talking about it. "But we never forgot," the captain said firmly. "None of us forgot." He gestured to the hundreds of men standing behind him. "This morning, word spread through our network that the woman who saved 47 Navy SEALs was being abandoned on her wedding day." Yuki's eyes widened. "How did they know?" "One of your wedding guests posted about it online," the captain explained, as if reading her mind. "A cousin of yours. It reached one of the men who was on that bus. Within 2 hours we had mobilized 800 SEALs from bases across Japan, from ships at sea, some even flying in from other countries, all of us wanting to be here." He took a step closer, his expression intense. "We came to tell you something very important, Miss Tanaka. You are not alone. You are not forgotten, and you are not defined by someone who was too foolish to see your worth." Yuki's knees buckled and her father caught her. The memories flooded back so clearly now. That dark, stormy night, the terror in those men's eyes, the freezing water pulling at her clothes, the desperate struggle to help them breathe, to keep them calm, to save them. She had nightmares for months afterward. She would wake up gasping, feeling like she was drowning all over again, but she never spoke about it. It felt too big, too heavy to put into words, so she buried it deep inside and tried to move on with her life. And now, 4 years later, here stood 800 men in uniform, telling her they remembered, telling her it mattered. Captain Morrison waited patiently while she collected herself. The entire ballroom held its breath. Even the hotel staff had stopped moving, transfixed by what was unfolding. "I didn't do anything special," Yuki finally managed to say, her voice shaking. I couldn't leave them there. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't," the captain replied gently. 3 cars drove past that accident before you stopped. You were the only one who risked your life to help strangers. That makes you special, Miss Tanaka. That makes you a hero. The word felt strange, hero. She was just a translator, just an ordinary woman who'd acted on instinct. But looking at the faces of these 800 men, seeing the respect and gratitude in their eyes, something shifted inside her. Captain Morrison turned to address the entire room. "Today was supposed to be a wedding. Instead, we're here for a different kind of ceremony. With Miss Tanaka's permission, we would like to present her with the Navy's highest civilian honor for heroism. An honor that was approved 4 years ago, but that she never stayed around long enough to receive." He looked back at Yuki. "Will you accept?" She could barely see through her tears. Her mother squeezed her hand. Her father nodded encouragingly. All around the room, the original wedding guests watched with expressions that had transformed from pity to amazement. "Yes," Yuki whispered. Then louder, "Yes, I will." What happened next was something nobody in that room would ever forget. 2 officers stepped forward carrying a wooden box lined with velvet. Inside lay a gleaming metal, its ribbon striped with navy blue and gold. Captain Morrison lifted it carefully, and as he did, all 800 servicemen came to attention simultaneously. The sound of their movement was like thunder, perfectly synchronized. The captain approached Yuki, and with great ceremony he pinned the medal onto her wedding dress. The same dress she had thought would become a symbol of her greatest humiliation was now decorated with one of the highest honors a civilian could receive, for extraordinary heroism and valor in saving the lives of 47. United States Navy personnel, Captain Morrison announced, his voice carrying through the ballroom. We present this honor to Yuki Tanaka, a true hero who exemplifies courage, selflessness, and grace under pressure. The SEALs erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but thunderous, sustained clapping that shook the chandeliers. The wedding guests joined in, many of them crying now. Yuki's mother sobbed openly, clutching her husband's arm. Even Hiroshi's parents, who had been sitting in stunned silence, stood and applauded. But the ceremony wasn't over. One by one, men began stepping forward from the crowd of SEALs. The first was a young man, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Miss Tanaka, he said through the translator. My name is David. I was trapped in the driver's seat of that bus. I couldn't get the door open and water was rushing in. I thought I was going to die. Then I saw your face through the window. You broke the glass with a rock and pulled me out. Because of you, I went home to my wife. Because of you, I got to meet my daughter when she was born 3 months later. She's 3 years old now, and every night when I tuck her in, I think about you. He saluted Yuki, his hand trembling slightly, then stepped back. Another man came forward. He was older, with scars visible on his hands. I'm Robert. I had a collapsed lung and 3 broken ribs. I was going into shock from the cold water. You held my head above water for 15 minutes until the paramedics arrived. You kept talking to me, telling me about your life, about Tokyo, about anything to keep me conscious. The doctors said if I'd gone under, I would have died. You gave me a second chance at life. One by one they came. 47 men whose lives Yuki had saved, each with a story. Each with a family they got to return to because of her actions that night. There was Michael, who had gotten married 2 years ago. There was James, who had become a father to twin boys. There was Chris, who had started a charity helping disaster victims. There was Anthony, who had gone back to school and become a teacher. Each life had continued, had flourished, had created ripples of goodness in the world. All because Yuki had stopped her car on a rainy night. By the time the last man finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the ballroom. Yuki's carefully applied makeup was completely ruined, her face streaked with tears. But she had never looked more beautiful. The sadness and humiliation from earlier had been replaced by something else. Not happiness exactly, but a profound sense of being seen, of being valued for who she truly was. Her best friend Keiko pushed through the crowd and hugged her tightly. Why didn't you ever tell us? She whispered. All this time you never said a word. Yuki shook her head. It didn't seem important. I was just doing what felt right. That's exactly why it's important, Captain Morrison said, overhearing. The best kind of heroism is the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't ask for recognition or reward, but that doesn't mean it should go unnoticed. He gestured to the assembled SEALs. Every man in this room either owed you their life directly or knows someone who does. When word spread this morning that you needed support, there was no question. We mobilized immediately. Some of these men traveled for hours to be here. Some left important assignments. Some have families waiting at home. But they all wanted to be here to show you something. What's that? Yuki asked softly. That real commitment looks like this, he said firmly. Real love and respect looks like this. 800 men who will never forget what you did. Who will tell their children and grandchildren about the brave woman who saved their lives. Your actions 4 years ago created bonds that will last forever. That's worth infinitely more than a marriage to someone who runs away when things get difficult. The words hit home. Hiroshi had run. He had made promises and broken them at the first sign of doubt. But these men, these strangers she had helped one terrible night, had crossed oceans and continents to honor her. Captain Morrison's expression softened. Miss Tanaka, we have one more thing to ask of you. This venue is beautiful. The food is prepared. The music is ready. These 200 guests came here to celebrate something today. And we believe there's still something worth celebrating. Yuki looked confused. What do you mean? We'd like to turn this into a different kind of celebration. Not a wedding, but a recognition of your character, your courage, and your worth. We've taken the liberty of making some adjustments to the reception plans. With your permission, we'd like to honor you properly. 800 Navy SEALs and 200 of your closest friends and family, all coming together to show you what you truly deserve. Around the room, the wedding guests nodded enthusiastically. Yuki's grandmother, who had been silent through all of this, suddenly stood up from her seat. At 85 years old, she moved slowly but with determination. She walked up to her granddaughter and took both her hands. "When I gave you my wedding necklace this morning," she said in Japanese, her voice strong despite her age, "I told you it brought me 60 years of happiness with your grandfather. But the truth is, the necklace didn't bring happiness. The marriage did. And not just any marriage, but one built on true respect and honor." She touched the medal now pinned to Yuki's dress. "This is worth more than any wedding ring. This represents who you really are. Never forget that, my dear child. Never settle for someone who doesn't see this in you." Yuki embraced her grandmother, fresh tears flowing. When she pulled back, she looked at Captain Morrison and nodded. "Yes, let's celebrate." The ballroom erupted in cheers. Within minutes, the entire atmosphere of the ballroom transformed. What had been a space filled with embarrassment and pity became something entirely different. Something magical. The SEALs moved with efficient precision, working alongside the hotel staff. They repositioned chairs, rearranged tables, and somehow made room for 800 additional people in a space designed for 200. It shouldn't have been possible, but they made it work. Some stood along the walls. Others sat on the floor. Nobody complained. In fact, they seemed honored just to be there. The decorations stayed exactly as Yuki had planned them. The white orchids, the cherry blossoms, the elegant table settings. But now they took on a different meaning. This wasn't a celebration of a marriage that never happened. It was a celebration of something deeper, of human courage, of integrity, of a life lived with purpose. Hotel staff wheeled out the food that had been prepared for the wedding reception. There were elegant Japanese dishes, fresh sushi and sashimi, perfectly grilled fish, delicate tempura, steaming bowls of miso soup. There were also Western options, roasted chicken, beef tenderloin, fresh salads, mountains of food that Yuki had spent months selecting. "There's not going to be enough," Yuki's mother worried, looking at the 800 extra guests. "We only planned for 200 people, but Captain Morrison smiled. "Don't worry, ma'am. We came prepared." He made a signal and several SEALs left the ballroom. They returned minutes later carrying military ration packs and supplies. "We never go anywhere unprepared. We'll supplement what you have. Everyone will eat well tonight." It was surreal. Elegant wedding food served alongside military rations. Crystal champagne flutes next to standard-issue canteens. But somehow it worked. It became a symbol of two worlds coming together, of different people united by gratitude and respect. The string quartet, who had been standing awkwardly in the corner unsure what to do, began playing again. They started with classical pieces, but then one of the SEALs approached them with a request. Soon they were playing a mix of music, traditional Japanese songs, American anthems, modern pop hits. The mood lifted with every note. Yuki found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk to her. Her cousins, who she only saw at family gatherings, hugged her tightly. Her colleagues from work expressed their amazement. Even people she barely knew came up to shake her hand and tell her how inspiring she was. But the most touching moments came from the SEALs themselves. Beyond the 47 whose lives she had directly saved, hundreds of others had stories to share. They told her about friends who had been on that bus. They talked about how her actions had rippled through the entire SEAL community, becoming a story that was told to new recruits as an example of true heroism. One older SEAL, probably in his 60s, approached with tears in his eyes. "My son was on that bus," he said quietly. "He was one of the men you pulled out. I never got to thank you in person. I live in California, and by the time I heard the full story and tried to find you, you had disappeared. I've thought about you every single day for 4 years. Every morning when I call my son, I think about you. Every holiday when he comes home, I think about you. You gave me my child back." He pulled out his wallet and showed her a photo. A young man in uniform, grinning at the camera, with his arm around an older version of himself. Father and son, a relationship that continued because of one woman's courage. Yuki couldn't speak. She just hugged him, this stranger who felt like family, and they both cried. The speeches began around 7 in the evening. Captain Morrison stood at the podium where the wedding officiant had been supposed to conduct the ceremony. But instead of wedding vows, there were testimonials. Stories of bravery, of character, of a woman who represented the best of humanity. One of the SEALs, a man named Peter who had been unconscious when Yuki pulled him from the bus, told how he woke up in the hospital with no memory of being saved. The other guys told me about a Japanese woman who wouldn't give up, who kept diving back into that water even though she was exhausted and freezing, who refused to leave until every single person was accounted for. I never knew her name until today, but I've been living my life trying to be worthy of that sacrifice, trying to be someone who deserves a second chance. Yuki's father stood next, his voice thick with emotion. I am a businessman. I've spent my whole life measuring success in profit margins and quarterly reports, but today I learned that I've been measuring the wrong things. My daughter's success cannot be found in any spreadsheet or bank account. It's in the lives she's touched, the people she's saved, the courage she's shown. I am humbled and honored to be her father. Even Hiroshi's mother stood to speak, her face red from crying. I am ashamed of my son. I raised him to be better than this. I taught him about honor and commitment, but clearly those lessons didn't take root. Miss Tanaka, you deserve so much better than what my family gave you. You deserved loyalty and respect, and instead you got cowardice. I hope someday you can forgive us. Yuki nodded graciously, though forgiveness felt complicated. She wasn't angry at Hiroshi's mother. The woman hadn't abandoned her. But the wound was still fresh, still raw. As the evening continued, something unexpected happened. People began to dance. It started with a few brave souls, then spread. The seals danced with wedding guests. Yuki's grandmother ended up dancing with a decorated Navy captain, both of them laughing like teenagers. Children who had been bored during the serious ceremony now ran around the ballroom, playing with military men who seemed delighted to entertain them. Yuki's bridesmaids pulled her onto the dance floor. At first she resisted. She was still wearing her wedding dress, still processing everything that had happened. But Keiko wouldn't take no for an answer. This is your party now, Keiko insisted. Not Hiroshi's, not anyone else's, yours. So dance. And she did. Yuki danced with her friends, with her father, with several of the seals who politely asked for the honor. She danced until her feet hurt in her elegant shoes. She danced until she forgot about the embarrassment of being abandoned. She danced until she remembered what it felt like to be herself, free and unburdened. The wedding cake was brought out around 9 o'clock. It was a masterpiece. 5 tiers covered in delicate white fonda, decorated with sugar flowers that looked impossibly real. Yuki had worked with the baker for months to get it exactly right. She had imagined cutting it with Hiroshi, their hands together on the knife, feeding each other small bites while guests cheered. But that fantasy was gone now. Instead, Captain Morrison handed her the knife and said, "This cake represents all the effort and care you put into planning a future. That effort wasn't wasted. That care still matters. Cut it not for a marriage that never happened, but for a life that's worth celebrating." Yuki cut into the cake with steady hands. The first slice went to her parents, the second to her grandmother, the third to the elderly seal whose son she had saved. And then everyone lined up, and the cake was shared among 800 seals and 200 wedding guests. There wasn't quite enough for everyone to have a full piece, but everyone got a taste, and somehow that felt right. Everyone sharing in this unexpected celebration. As the evening wore on, Yuki found a quiet moment to step outside onto the hotel's terrace. The October air was cool and crisp. Tokyo's city lights sparkled in the distance. She could still hear music and laughter from inside, but out here it was peaceful. She touched the metal pinned to her dress, feeling its weight. This morning she had put on this gown thinking it would mark the beginning of her marriage. Now it marked something entirely different. A recognition of her worth. A reminder that her value didn't depend on whether someone chose to marry her. Captain Morrison joined her on the terrace, keeping a respectful distance. "How are you holding up, Miss Tanaka?" She thought about the question. How was she holding up? "This morning I thought my life was ending," she said honestly. "I thought I would never recover from the humiliation. But now I realize something. Hiroshi didn't leave because there was something wrong with me. He left because he couldn't handle someone like me, someone who would risk everything for strangers, someone who doesn't need validation to know what's right." The captain nodded. "That's exactly right. You intimidated him with your strength even if he didn't realize it." Yuki smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time all day. "I think I'm going to be okay." "I know you will be," he replied. "And if you ever need anything, you have 800 brothers who will show up for you." "That's a promise." Inside, someone cranked up the music and cheers erupted. Yuki laughed and headed back toward the celebration, ready to embrace whatever came next. The celebration continued until nearly midnight, when the last guests finally began leaving. Yuki stood at the entrance of the ballroom saying goodbye. Each seal who passed her stopped to salute or shake her hand. Many pressed small gifts into her palm. Challenge coins from their units, patches from their uniforms, handwritten notes with contact information. "If you ever need anything," they said, over and over. "If you're ever in trouble, if you ever need help, you call us. We'll be there." It wasn't just words. Yuki could see in their eyes they meant every syllable. She had earned something rare and precious, the absolute loyalty of people who understood the meaning of sacrifice. Her parents stood beside her, equally overwhelmed. Her father kept shaking his head in wonder. "I've been alive for 60 years, he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this. Not even close." By 1 in the morning, only Yuki's closest family remained. They sat together in the now empty ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration. Wilted flowers, half-empty champagne glasses, chairs pushed askew. The hotel staff had offered to clean everything up, but Yuki asked them to wait. She wanted to sit in this space a little longer, to absorb what had happened. "What are you going to do now?" her mother asked gently, holding her daughter's hand. Yuki looked down at her wedding dress. It was dirty at the hem from all the dancing, slightly torn where she had stepped on it climbing stairs. The metal still gleamed on her chest, catching the light from the chandeliers. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think that's okay. I don't need to have everything figured out right now." Her grandmother, who had been quiet for the past hour, finally spoke. "When your grandfather died 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. We had been together for 60 years. I didn't know how to exist without him. But then I realized something. My life wasn't over. It was different, yes. Painful, certainly, but not over. And in some ways I discovered parts of myself I had forgotten existed, parts that had gotten buried under being someone's wife." She squeezed Yuki's hand. "Today was supposed to be the beginning of you becoming someone's wife. Instead, it became the day you remembered who you are without that role. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one yet." Yuki nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Good tears this time. Healing tears. They finally left the hotel around 2 in the morning. Yuki changed out of her wedding dress in the bridal suite, carefully hanging it in its garment bag. She would keep it, she decided. Not as a reminder of Hiroshi's betrayal, but as a reminder of the day 800 people showed her what real commitment looked like. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The story went viral internationally. News outlets from around the world wanted to interview her. Social media exploded with the hashtag 800seals. Millions of people shared the story, adding their own messages of support and admiration. But Yuki turned down most interview requests. She didn't want to become famous. She didn't want to be known as that abandoned bride for the rest of her life. She wanted to move forward, to figure out what came next on her own terms. Hiroshi tried to contact her 3 weeks after the wedding that never was. He sent a long email, filled with apologies and excuses. He claimed he had panicked, that he still loved her, that he had made a terrible mistake and wanted another chance. Yuki read the email once, then deleted it. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He had shown her exactly who he was in his moment of truth, and she believed him. 6 months later, Yuki sat in a small coffee shop in Tokyo, meeting with representatives from an international disaster response organization. After everything that had happened, she had realized something important. That night in Okinawa hadn't been a one-time thing. She had a skill, a capacity to help people in crisis, and she wanted to use it. "We need someone who can coordinate between Japanese emergency services and international rescue teams," the coordinator explained, sliding papers across the table. "Someone who stays calm under pressure, someone with first-hand experience in disaster response." Your name came up immediately. Yuki smiled. "Tell me more." She took the job. Over the following months, she traveled to disaster sites across Asia, helping coordinate rescue efforts after earthquakes, floods, and typhoons. She translated for rescue teams, organized supply chains, and trained local volunteers. She was good at it. More than good. She was exceptional. The work was hard and sometimes heartbreaking. She saw terrible things, but she also saw incredible resilience and kindness. She saw communities coming together. She saw strangers helping strangers. And she realized this was where she belonged. 1 year after the wedding that never was, Yuki received an invitation. The Navy was holding a special ceremony in Okinawa, commemorating the 5th anniversary of the bus accident. All 47 survivors would be there along with their families. They wanted Yuki to be the guest of honor. She almost said no. Part of her wanted to move on completely, to stop being defined by that one night. But then she realized she wasn't being defined by it. She was being connected to it, to those men and their families, to a moment when she had been her truest self. She went to Okinawa. The ceremony was held at the naval base overlooking the ocean where the accident had occurred. Yuki stood on the platform looking out at hundreds of faces. The 47 men she had saved stood in formation, many now with wives and children beside them. She saw the babies who had been born after the accident, toddlers who existed because their fathers had survived. She saw teenagers who still had their parents because of what happened that night. Captain Morrison gave a speech. 5 years ago, during a terrible storm, we lost control of a bus. We should have lost 47 lives that night. But we didn't, because one woman refused to accept that outcome. Miss Tanaka didn't know us. She had no obligation to help. She could have driven past like others did. But she didn't. And because of her choice, 47 families remained whole. 12 children got to grow up with their fathers. 8 babies were born who might never have existed. Countless lives were touched and changed. He turned to Yuki. You asked me once why we made such a big deal about what you did. Why we brought 800 men to your wedding day. I'll tell you why. Because in a world that often feels dark and divided, you reminded us that goodness exists, that people still help strangers. That courage isn't just something that happens on battlefields. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is stop your car on a rainy night. Yuki stepped up to speak, her hands shaking slightly. 5 years ago, I helped some people during an emergency. I never expected recognition. I never expected to see any of you again. But what happened a year ago on what should have been my wedding day taught me something important. We're not meant to go through life alone. We're not meant to suffer in silence. When you showed up with 800 SEALs and 75 vehicles, you were telling me that my actions mattered. That I mattered, not because of who I was going to marry, but because of who I am. She paused, looking at the faces before her. I spent so long thinking I needed someone else to complete me, that I needed a wedding and a marriage to prove I was successful. But the truth is I was already complete. I was already successful. I just needed to remember that. You helped me remember. So thank you for showing up, for caring, for being the kind of people who honor their debts and keep their promises. After the ceremony, families approached her one by one. A 5-year-old girl handed her a drawing. My daddy says you're the reason I got born, she said seriously. So I made you this picture. It's a rainbow because you made everything better. Yuki knelt down and hugged the little girl, the drawing clutched in her hands. That evening, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, Yuki thought about everything that had changed in 1 year. She had lost a fiancé but gained 800 brothers. She had endured public humiliation, but discovered her true strength. She had planned for one future and found a completely different one, better than she could have imagined. Her phone buzzed. A message from Keiko. Dinner next week? I want to hear about your latest rescue mission. Yuki smiled and typed back, absolutely. I have so much to tell you. She looked at the ocean, at the exact spot where 5 years ago she had jumped in without thinking, without hesitating. Just doing what felt right. She would never regret that choice. Not the choice to save those men, and not the choice to save herself by refusing to settle for someone who didn't appreciate her worth. Her wedding dress hung in her closet at home, preserved carefully. Sometimes she looked at it and smiled, not with sadness but with gratitude. That dress had witnessed the worst and best moments of her life. It had seen her abandoned and celebrated, humiliated and honored, and pinned forever to that dress was a medal that reminded her she didn't need someone else to make her special. She already was. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Yuki stood up, brushed the sand from her clothes, and walked back toward her future. Whatever it held, she was ready.